I got it. Okay, so there we go. Now we're all set. So yeah, so we had some folks. Welcome to the Let's Get Fire Ready career workshop. We've had some folks that are interested in a few different pathways. So if you already watched the video that we did a little while ago, I'd highly suggest if you haven't, go take some time, go review that on the FireUp website. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the fire and forestry career pathways toolkit that we've developed and that Sheffley here has developed in conjunction with a few other folks. So objective here is to provide some guidance, kind of a one-stop shop, how to get to different careers, different pathways in both fire and forestry. As we talk about mitigation and particularly wildfire risk mitigation, there's a bunch of different things that kind of come into that mix. It's not all just fire. So part of what we're looking at, I mean, here we have just every possible line of work that's in this particular field. From science and research to conservation work, forestry work, fire management, obviously. We have some cross-cutting skills that those are things, when we say cross-cutting skills, we mean a basic skill that is generally applicable across all kinds of domains. For example, one that I'll look at, marketing and communications. So, my career, my past history, this is my 20th year in wildland fire. I spent about half of my career, spent 14 years with the U.S. Forest Service, full-time in fire management, most of that out west. Moved to Missouri back in 2020, spent 2 years with the agency here, doing a ton of prescribed burning. And that was kind of the objective of moving out here was to really get some hands-on, large prescribed fire experience. Had plenty of large wildfire experience from California, Oregon, Nevada, Arizona, also Arizona, New Mexico, the Horseshoe 2 fire. Ryan was on that back in 2011. So one thing that's really kind of marketing communications. So I spent 4 years as a fire captain in the ECC, Central California Interagency Dispatch Center, handling a very large chunk of the middle of California for all kinds of things: fire, law enforcement, aviation, medical aids. We did all risk response at the time in the Forest Service and BLM, Bureau of Land Management, that is. And then afterwards, I promoted to a prevention battalion on the Malheur National Forest in Eastern Oregon. And so prevention, mitigation, outreach, that is all marketing, communications, understanding people. The science of how we think is super helpful as well. So one of those cross-cutting skills is that, how do we market and communicate fire to folks, right? Some of you everybody knows, only you, 99% of people can complete that phrase, right? Can prevent wildfires. One of the most successful communications campaigns ever in the history of fire, period. And Smokey is second behind Santa Claus only in terms of how well he is known. And so, you may have also heard One Less Spark, One Less Wildfire. That's a relatively new one that's come out in the last few years. And so how we communicate with folks about fire, how we communicate risk to people about fire, vitally important. That is one of those, but that's also something that applies to research, right? I mean, you have folks that are academics, you have to write papers, you have to understand how to communicate with folks. Likewise, forestry, conservation, a lot of that is very public facing. So you're dealing a lot with landowners, and you need to be able to communicate in a constructive, positive fashion with those landowners. So ultimately, there's these cross-cutting things that no matter what your specialty may be, you still need some basic administrative, data science, HR possibly if you're a supervisor, manager, leader. IT is huge. Just knowing those basics and having those kinds of things in line, no matter where you work, no matter what you're doing, those are awesome. One of the other things we're looking to do here is connect people with mentors. For example, Ryan and I are both in the mentor network for FireUp, dealing in. I particularly specialize in the fire management piece. Ryan does as well. He works with the Flagstaff Fire Department, and also does a lot of our interview prep and resume writing workshops. So he'll be kind of your entry point into our continuum of things, from, how do I just graduated school, or I'm looking for a fire and forestry job, to how do I scoot in there? How do I move in there and be successful? Well, Ryan's going to be your first stop, and then, I can kind of maybe help line you out as far as the additional career paths coming up. Ultimately, it's just all about helping folks succeed. That's really the goal here, is we're just trying to connect folks with knowledge, skills, and abilities to promote their talent, to use their talent, whether it's in the private sector, the non-governmental organization sector, the government sector, no matter where you want to work, even self-employed. Those are options as well. So no matter where you work, no matter what you're doing, we're trying to connect you with those resources. All right, and so we're over here on the FireUp Career Pathways page in the Career Pathways Toolkit on FireUp. One of the things that kind of really cross-cuts a lot of these particular fields you see up on the screen here, talking about that risk management, wildfire prevention, mitigation, home hardening, structure defense, fire adapted communities, FireWise, whatever you want to call it, right? Those are all programs within specific organizations. FireWise belongs to an FPA, fire adapted communities. They're all different things that everybody has. There's several different groups that have their own varying programs. Ultimately, it's all the same goal. We are trying to help people protect their homes, protect their lives from devastating effects of wildfire. So it's a growing field. It's something that is desperately needed, as we're seeing, right? There's no more fire season. We talk about, I'm originally from California. Ryan is from Arizona. And even back, I left California in 2015. And I remember in 2015, we had air tankers on base at Porterville in January, in February. Now it creates a little bit of a logistical problem, right? Because aircraft need that annual maintenance cycle. So they were rotating aircraft through the airbase like every couple days. But ultimately, there's no more fire season. It's year round. The Palisades fire, the Eaton fire, they show us that, right? East of the Rockies, it's kind of a bimodal fire season to begin with, where spring and fall are your primary fire seasons out here. Now I live in Missouri. Our fire season starts in late January, early February, rolls until late April, maybe first week of May, and then picks up again in September and rolls through until December. So even still, we've had a number of fires, large fires now, out in the eastern U.S., New Jersey, New York, Oklahoma. Just recently had, over the last couple months, they've had a couple of large fires that destroyed 362 plus homes. So there's this need. It's a national need. It's no longer just a California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah need. It is an everywhere need. And so we need to really develop folks into that mitigation role, and how you get there is, honestly, the traditional path is, well, you go be a wildland firefighter, right? You go be a wildland firefighter for a few years, do all your NWCG classes, move up, and eventually get to that point where you are in a promotional role to be a fire prevention tech or fire prevention specialist with one of the major land management agencies. Or likewise, same thing with the state generally, right? Like state prevention folks, CAL FIRE, captains and battalion chiefs in prevention are promoted from the ranks of the regular firefighters. ODF, fire prevention folks, are promoted from the ranks of regular firefighters. And usually that's a several year process to get there in terms of the qualifications technical expertise, etc., to get there. This is several years of work. I think we need to start working on maybe shortening that up and creating some alternative pathways and building some pipelines, shall we say, to go ahead and really give folks what you need to know to be able to evaluate a home for home hardening, defensible space. Do you need to be a bachelor degreed forester with your, state licensed forestry exam behind you and all that? No, you don't need that for, if you're looking at a home, you're looking at home ignition zone and within that, 0 feet immediate to 30 to 100 foot out, you really don't need to be a forester or landscape architect to do that sort of thing. So, but also at the same time, do you also need to be a battalion chief of wildland fire in order to do that either? No, you don't. So I think this is kind of that. What do you need is a basic understanding of wildland fire. Yes, a couple of years doing that, especially in an area where you're going to get that exposure to wildland urban interface fire, is huge. Go to California, go to a national forest, BLM area, park, etc., that is, or a state agency that is somewhere nearby a decent population center where you're going to get that WUI experience. Absolutely. Bigger thing is the ability to communicate and market things. Like I said, the communication piece is vital. As a prevention mitigation specialist, that is 100% of your job, right? Like, you're not there to swing a chainsaw or a tool. You are there to plan and plan mitigation actions, assist homeowners, talk to homeowners, get their buy-in, because that's important, right? It's their property, it's their land. They're the ones making the decisions ultimately as to what they're going to do with their home. So it is up to you to approach that with a knowledgeable, competent demeanor, able to communicate your knowledge and competence, and get buy-in from that homeowner to say, hey, yeah, that, here's this list of things you could do. Caulk this. There's a little crack in your foundation. Put some caulking in it. You need to install screens on your attics, etc. That stuff, you could just hand anybody a list and they'll look at it and they'll go, well, okay, maybe I will, maybe I won't. But ultimately, if you are able to communicate to them the why and wherefore and how, you're going to be much more successful in the long run. Ryan, you got something to add?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Mark. Those are all awesome points. I think the big thing you're talking about there, I think when we think of wildland fire or what the ultimate goal here is, right? Which is, we want wildland or fire adapted communities. And really what we're trying to do is, like you've already spoke to, is make healthier communities that are safer, that can prosper and be better in the long term, right? Living in the areas we want to live in, which we now know and understand is like this is part of an ecosystem where fire is present, and we need to be prepared for that. And so the big thing when we think about and start planning for this and moving forward that we like to talk about, you'll hear a lot within public safety, and not just with wildland fire, but everywhere. We talk about the 5 E's of community risk reduction. And so the main one of that, going back to what Mark talked about with that, is that emergency response, right? When we think of what is, how does a community protected from fire, we immediately jump to, suppression, operations, that emergency response model with that, right? And there are a lot of parts that attach to even the emergency response, which cover a lot of these. You have to have a dispatch center, you have to have technology with that, you have to have engineers with that, you have to have a detection system of some sort. There might be technology tied to that that's doing that detection as well, right? And then you have like the technology of the apparatus and the stuff we're using on the apparatus and the logistics of like us being supplied, and then a whole HR arm just handling that's just emergency response alone. But then there's another four factors within that community risk reduction. And those other four are going to be like education. That's a huge one. We need to make sure people understand what's going on. That's where that communication comes in huge. It's also important in emergency response and the roles that support emergency response. But specifically in education, that's a huge one, right? You also need to have some type of engineering background there if you're developing a program or software or something, right? There's a role for everybody within that as well. There's specific engineering as well. When we're doing this mitigation stuff,
Oh, did I?
modeling. We need people with that understanding, that background that could come in and help with that planning and engineer what it is we're trying to do to help reduce that risks and plan going forward on a grander scale. You also have to have enforcement. We can make all these rules, do this education, but if people aren't following it, we need a means to like make sure that what we're creating is being followed. So you can get involved with enforcement with that. That's not saying like police officers only. Once again, that could be like someone doing research within that field of finding out what type of modeling on the enforcement we're going to do, or how to detect like a community on a level that isn't following within the guides that have been put out, right? Like you're developing software for that. There's all sorts of roles within that as well. And then the last one I like to talk about is like economic incentives. There's even a need for like business professionals here in terms of traditional financing people or people who understand money and grants and things like that. That is huge. None of this can get done unless we have the proper funding. Once you get up into admin positions, even within the emergency response realm, you need to know how to write a grant and get that funding and get it to where it needs to be and understand how to run a balance sheet. That's a basic skill that is very critical. And as an entry level person, are these things you don't have to worry about? No. But the people who are coming up in the ranks, we might understand that emergency response model, but we need that support around us, or we might need a company to come in as a contractor and assist us with that. And that's where all these roles come in and play with, right? And like Mark said, you could be a nonprofit, you could be public, you can be a private entity. There's a long list of different options out there, and they're all going to play into these different factors within it. And then my last like kind of tidbit on the whole thing is like, we talk back to, the main goal is that fire adaptive community and having a safe, prosperous like community that we're living in. That's the ultimate goal here. Whether it's a national forest or a town, a city, a state, or the country as a whole. But we want to also, while we're dealing with these 5Es and handling this, and with the response models, the emergency response, try to make sure we're doing this economically, environmentally intelligently, and socially. And so also keeping those main three that and make sure we're addressing those as we're going through this process. And if you just sit down and kind of take the time and go through each of these, you'll see for yourselves like all these are like you might be like, well, how's this pertain to that? Well, they all directly pertain in some way or another. And finding out where you fit into these roles and then also where you want to go is what's important. So, look back, hey, what are my experiences? What are my good traits I have? What knowledge do I have? And where is that needed within this field? Because I guarantee you could find a spot. And getting you there, getting you that fit, that works best for you, that's going to be huge. So,
And you're right. And a lot of what I did, so like I said, I was the senior prevention officer on the MAL here and the prevention program manager, as far as prevention, mitigation, and outreach for that area. And so looking at all of these general areas right here, with the exception of urban forestry, I touched and worked with as a prevention program supervisor each and every one of these, right? And I can take 2 minutes here and loop them all together for you, no matter what career field you're in. So, forestry, timber, range management, right? These are the things that burn in a wildfire. They're also the people who are going to sit down at the table as you're developing a community wildfire prevention plan. If you are developing something that is, as you said, Ryan, ecologically wise, ecologically sound, these folks are going to have, and the geologists are going to have a pretty big seat at the table, along with watersheds, hydrology, biology, botany. those folks are all going to be informing those decisions of the treatments that you decide upon, how and when and where. Seasonality is super important, especially in my neck of the woods now. Seasonality drives a lot of stuff in terms of migratory patterns, nesting and brood rearing for turkey and other game animals, non-game animals. So yeah, so archaeology, that's a big one too. Show me a place on the map that doesn't have some kind of historically significant or culturally significant resource, as far as leftovers from settlers, from Native American tribes, from we've been touching the land for thousands and thousands of years, and there's pieces of that history left all over this country. So archaeology, absolutely. Mapping and GIS, those are the folks that are going to produce all the really cool, pretty maps that can tell you exactly what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, where you're going to do it, where your danger zones are. Recreation, a lot of our fire starts, pretty much anywhere in the country. A lot of our fire starts are somewhat tiered, at least, to recreation and recreational activities, right? Whether it's people camping in the woods and they have a campfire during fire restrictions, or hunters having a fire, or OHVs. OHVs are another big one out west, especially. Landscape restoration, same thing. Those are the folks that the ecologist that's going to sit at that table. R&D, that's one that, so when I was coming into prevention, Dr. Sarah McCaffrey, who worked for the Northern Rockies Research Station, she's a social scientist actually, and she wrote a number of papers centering on how we communicate about fire and how we talk about fire and fire risk, and how we communicate that to the public and what the public perceives and receives as valid, credible information. Firefighting and prevention, kind of a no-brainer there. At least from my perspective, if you're sitting in that prevention spot or that community wildfire risk manager spot, you're probably promoted up through the firefighting and prevention ranks, most likely. Biology, botany, wildlife, again, those are those ecologically minded folks that are going to help guide you in writing your prescriptions for thinning, burning, etc., your overarching plan of land management. Urban forestry, likewise, as we see more urban conflagration type of fire activity, those folks are going to become vital as well to manage woods, manage open spaces in towns in such a way that they arrest fire spread, or at least don't contribute to fire spread. IT, same thing. Like Ryan said, there's just anymore we're so, everything is IT. Look at us right here having a conversation all over the country, right? Teaching, training, education, to me, that's huge. One of the big things for me, and I think for Ryan, is giving back. I was very privileged to grow up in a community on the Sequoia National Forest under some very old, very salty fire dogs who gave me a hell of a lot of information, advice, guidance, and mentoring through my young years as a firefighter. And so it's really important for me now that I'm maybe not that old and salty yet, but to start that process of giving back and paying it forward. Ryan, you want to jump in on anything there?
No, I think that was, a good breakdown of each of these. And the reality of it is there's endless really opportunities within the field. And on a simpler note, I talked about the 5 E's, like you could fall into any of those, but just realizing like, the more you look at these, like it really comes down to a few things, right? Like we have like a prevention, like we're trying to mitigate this before it actually happens, right? Whatever you want to term, however you want to term that, right? Like we're trying to address this possibility of fire, wildfire risk prior to it arriving. Then we have our response, our emergency response of, okay, well, the fire's here, we got to deal with it, right? And then, we also have the last part, like the follow-up, right? Like after that, for both ourselves, our communities, and maybe like enforcement, right? On some level. To, make sure this doesn't happen again in terms of, if there's arson or something like that. But realizing where this falls in there, and really they all fall in there, each one. You can be doing research for detection, which is, you can argue that's a response thing. But really that can also lead over into mitigation efforts, right? And so, I hear a lot of people like ask like, well, what does mitigation mean? What is that? And it's just like you're on the front end of this, but you can still do any of these roles, but you're there to like prevent that thing from occurring, or that you're making it so that when it does occur, right? Because this is a natural thing, it's healthy, we need it in our communities. It's in a healthier, more controllable way with less risk, that risk mitigation aspect of it, right? And then once again, like as we're doing that, making sure we're hitting those big threes, right? Like we want it economically viable for our communities, right? Like we can't just be doing like grand things, right? That's where engineers come in, like help us figure out, more efficient ways of doing this stuff, safer, make it happen quicker too, and in a more reasonable manner. And then also environmentally, once again, they're plugged in for that. We got to make sure we're also not destroying our natural habitat around us and the places we call home, that we love for specific reasons why they exist. And then also like the social impacts of it. Like are we just creating any, communities within our group, by maybe we're only implementing this stuff in certain areas, or what is the reality of what these communities want, right? Like we have communities that they've grown around fire. That is part of their culture. That's part of their history. That is the expectation. And once again, we can't just say we're going to remove it, right? Like, and it's part of the environment too. There's science behind that to prove that. And so being a part of that process and finding your niche, within it, like where you want to sit in terms of like the response, where you want to sit in terms of the career field, and then like where you want to like focus on like being a part of that solution. And really like any one of these jobs, you're going to be helping with any three of those solutions. You might be involved with any five of those risks, that five E's, like factors we're trying to help with. So it's an awesome job. There's a lot of area for growth and expansion and different roles to try different things and grow. And that's always an exciting and fun thing. So don't feel like you don't have a spot just because you haven't been a seasonal firefighter. That's great. If you can do it, get in there and do that. And it helps get experience under your belt. It's awesome. But there's also a huge need for just like technical skills and knowledge, and even like HR people, right? Like that's huge. So there's a lot of options out there, to get involved.
Yep. I mean, I started my public safety journey in law enforcement, actually. I graduated high school, went to police academy, and it wasn't until years later I started, deciding I was going to be Mr. Public Safety, and I started collecting. Oh, I'm going to get my EMT. I'm going to go to fire academy. I'm going to go, and I was like, I want to go to the Forest Service and do wildland fire and do it all, right? Because the Forest Service has this job called prevention. And in the Forest Service, prevention does all of those things. And I was like, that's perfect. Utilize all the skills, man. I'm down. That's great. And so I did, and I got there, and it was awesome. And yeah, I got to work with each and every one of these disciplines in some form or another. Even like I said, even if it was just consuming research knowledge that academics had put together, you touch on and you talk to all these folks, and you get a kind of a basic idea, even watersheds and hydrology. I mean, I learned so much on the Malheur from the forest hydrologist, that, you know, talking about post fire erosion and how that affects streams and rivers and fish biology. I was like, man, there's a whole lot to learn in this world, and it's just so cool because you get that opportunity. You don't have to necessarily be like stovepiped up one, oh, well, I started here and I got to go here. Not necessarily. There's always options to move around back and forth. I mean, my career's been just a huge old meander. Yeah, there's just so many different opportunities out there. So yeah, absolutely. Don't think that, well, you got to be a firefighter. No, that's not true at all.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of laterals, and I think, if you go to any big fire incident, it even speaks there, right? That like you go to an incident, it is mainly a suppression operation. It's an emergency response. A fire as it came, it's a giant fire, and we need a giant team of people to help manage everyone coming in that are working to, in effect, just suppress a fire. Like that's the main priority. That's the main goal of that operation. And so, within even a team, you see this, right? Like we have to have people who handle comms. There's specific IT people that are doing that. We have mapping, we have GIS people, we have environmental people out there measuring, figuring out what effects we're doing or doing to the water where we're at to get ready for like a bear team that comes in behind us or something, right? Like there's, aviation involved with us, right? Like it's not just operations, it's not just like a bunch of like, dumbed down stuff. Like there's a huge team, there's a huge part of it. Like if we don't have finance there or HR people to handle things for us, that fire's not getting fought, like that's not happening. So having the teams we need, the different people there, I mean, just in like a fire response incident is huge. That's not including the mitigation and everything else, where it's even more so there, right? And the researchers who are helping us develop the tools and figure out better ways to fight those fires or prevent them from beginning, once again, that it's giant. So, my big thing is like I think for people, especially with FireUp, is use the resources we give you. That's again the uniqueness for you. I think for using us as mentors, it's great because we can help you kind of dive into your background, who you are, what your passions are, and try to help you kind of brainstorm good fits for you going forward. Like, hey, I was an engineer at this company doing software stuff. I don't know much about fire, but I want passion in my life. That's something I hear. I want to be a part of something where I feel like I'm doing helping with the better good. Well, maybe we can sit down and we can talk about what those roles look like with you. And then we can even possibly, if you want to dive in deeper, we can go to the listings on the site and go like, oh, here's some great listings, or at the minimum, come to the classes and we'll teach you how to do that research yourself and find that, based off your experience and what you think you want going forward. And you streamline that system for you going forward from here on out. That's the great resource and the listings too. We're going to have specific listings with specific jobs in this, specific jobs within the field. And the big thing too, I think, is like the career day, because we can go and read a job listing or we can see a posting, but it's nice when I can go and talk to the head of Ironwood Forestry and be like, hey, I'm kind of interested in this LiDAR stuff. I did a little bit of GIS in college. What is it you're doing exactly? What are your goals here? And what are you looking for like in this position? And if I don't fit that, where can I fit in so that I can learn that role and become more of an asset for you going forward? And just like engaging in that conversation and get FaceTime is huge. They're going to get to know you. You're going to get to grow and develop too as a person within the field and grow from there. And so, yeah, you utilize the tools we have and, find your spot and where you want to be and know like you don't need to be cornered into one thing. You can go anywhere and do anything um, and really help people. And that's the best part about this job. We get to help people and make a difference. At least it feels that way most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was, the time at the Forest Service was some of the best time absolutely some of the best time of my life. Especially on the mail here, where got to work with all those different people and do some really cool things in an area where no one thought it was possible, and we proved them wrong, and I think that's really awesome and epic. And so yeah, don't the self-limiting beliefs, I think, is as our coach Ann would probably say, right? Like that's a we need to steer away from those. We need to realize our true potential and move forward with a positive mindset. So
All right. We'll probably transition on that note, huh?
yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you all. Appreciate it. Appreciate it, Ryan Sheffley, and we'll see you next time.